This is some review and also the introduction to Alchemy Lesson 20. It's called Getting Connected, and it's about ionic compounds. So first we'll start with review. Chemical symbol. To the left is an example of a chemical symbol. This is just a general example. Location A is where you find. All right, on our symbol, location B is where you find, so just make sure, location B. Location C is where you find. Location D is where you find. Then location E is where you find. So, in case you have forgotten, A is the chemical identity. These are the letters from the periodic table. B is the atomic number, and it is also the number of protons. C is the mass number. The mass number is specific to an atom, not an element. An element is a collection of atoms that all have the same number of protons. D is the location of the charge if the atom has gained or lost electrons, and E is nothing. It was there as a red herring. Okay, so I want you to tell me, what is the mass number? And I want you to tell or answer the question, do all atoms of an element, so do all atoms of an element have the same mass number? So the question is, why don't all atoms of an element have the same mass number? And so these are the options. So this is from the last lesson. What is the difference between atoms and ions? Do all atoms of a main group element form the same charge? So, in other words, do all magnesium atoms form the same charge? Or do all nitrogen atoms form the same charge? Is the entire set of main group elements the same charge? Just a single element within the main group, do atoms of that element always form the same charge? So last time we learned that ionic charge is predictable, and so we want to know, what is it based on? And so the big message of the last lesson, to see if you learned it or remember it, why do atoms form ions? So why does this process happen at all? And the answer is that ions are formed to have a complete outer shell. And so they are going to gain or lose electrons to form a complete outer shell. So in the first period, hydrogen is going to lose its 1 electron to have 0 electrons in its outer shell. Helium doesn't gain or lose. It has 2 electrons, and that's considered a filled outer shell only for period 1. And then everything else, a filled outer shell is 8 electrons. So here is the chem catalyst for today's lesson. How many electrons does chlorine have in its valence shell? I know that there are tables here. This is a question that you can answer just by looking at the periodic table, not from these tables that are here. So just look at the periodic table and tell me, how many electrons does it have in its valence shell? And then, based upon what I just told you, how many electrons does chlorine need to get to a filled valence shell? So the answer to those were, chlorine has 7 electrons in its valence shell, and it needs to gain 1 electron in order to get to 8, or a filled valence shell. All right, how many electrons does sodium have in its valence shell? And based on its group, will it gain or lose electrons? So think about where it is on the periodic table. Again, for now, you can just ignore the tables that are on this slide. Based on its group, does sodium gain or lose electrons? Now, sodium is in the first group, so it has 1 valence electron, and it's going to lose. Because remember, elements in the first 3 groups, 1, 2, and 3, lose electrons. All right, now you can look at the tables. If sodium loses a single electron, where does it go? And the answer is it's going to go to chlorine. Chlorine needs to gain 1, sodium needs to lose 1, and so they form a bond when sodium loses 1 to chlorine. All right, let's see if we can make an inference. How many electrons does magnesium have in its valence shell, and based on its group, will it gain or lose electrons? So look at the periodic table. Magnesium is in group 2. It has 2 valence electrons, and it's going to lose both of them. So looking at the tables, where will the electrons go? And the answer is, I need to have 2 chlorines because each chlorine can only gain 1 electron. Magnesium, when it forms a bond, it has 2 to give away, so it gives 1 of them to one of the chlorines and the other one to the other chlorine. And so that's why we form MgCl2, because Mg needs to get rid of 2, but chlorine only needs to gain 1, so I need 2 chlorines in order to get both of the electrons off the magnesium so it can be stable. And again, this is when I gain or lose electrons when I'm forming bonds or forming compounds. So how many electrons do neon and argon have in their valence shell? Again, look at the periodic table. And the answer is they have 8. So why don't neon and argon form compounds? They don't need to gain or lose. 8 is a stable number, and so that's why they don't form compounds. So ionic compounds form between metal and non-metal elements. You're going to use a periodic table that should be, say to complete the table on page 80, and then answer questions 1 through 4 on page 79. So complete the table first using the periodic table. Remember, compounds form between metal and non-metal elements, so left side, right side, and then answer the questions.